Thank you for making time to join us today to this lunchtime seminar. The lunchtime seminar today comes from the Applied African Speculative Fiction project that we received some seed funding from Imperial. And we are collaborating with the University of Nairobi, and I'm hoping Professor Mburu and Mercy will be able to join us, or they have joined us today. So we welcome today in today's seminar. We are very much privileged to have with us Dr. Bergit Arends. Dr. Bergit Arends is a distinguished curator and an academic with a keen focus on the intersection of art and the environment in the global context. Her notable contributions include the acclaimed monograph, Photography, Ecology and Historical Change in the Anthropocene, and I think maybe you'll share a little bit more about that, which is also part of the series Photography, Place and Environment. Dr. Arends is a prolific presenter and author, having published widely on various topics, including An Equal Earth, the Botanical City, Botanical Drift, and interdisciplinary science reviews. She has also contributed to the critical discussions on decolonization, decolonizing the Natural History Museum. She has curated contemporary art projects for the Natural History Museum here in London and also in Berlin. She also serves as a British Academy postdoctoral fellow at the Coates Institute of Art, University of London, where she now teaches a tidalectic in contemporary art. Her current research focuses on critical course and anticipatory landscape ecology, which we will hear a little bit more also in the presentation. And so please join me to welcome Dr. Arends as she shares her insights and expertise with us today. Thank you very much. Awesome.
Great for the introduction.
Yes.
So just set that. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks very much for the introduction, Onesmus, and thank you very much for having me as part of the series. You can see in my title that I'm remaining a little bit cautious about the African part, so I'm just calling it contemporary art at the moment. But you'll see what I'm really interested in is to talk about artists who have got multiple cultural heritages in a way that I've been looking into. So I'm as Onesmus kindly said, I'm a curator, but I'm also an art historian. And so I'm particularly interested in environmental questions. So and I'm interested to have a conversation with you after I've shown you some of the give you sort of a brief insights into the topics that I'm working on, and I've been trying to sort of be mindful of what you might be interested in, and from where we could pick up on discussions that might have meaning to you as working on environmental change or environmental sciences, environmental policy. So that's kind of also determines somewhat the selection of works we'll be looking at. I will talk about some of the works, but also I think it's really important to give voice to the artists. Some of their practices are quite individualistic, quite idiosyncratic. So I want to give that a little bit of space. So you'll see at the beginning, I have an artist talking to you for a little while, but I will sort of run you through some of the frameworks for which I consider some of these practices, and for come on in. So I'm considering Afrofutures and aquatic worlds, but at the this very first slide, actually, it's a little bit of a different environment because we are actually in the air here. But it is I wanted to introduce this work in order just to help us start thinking about that artists are interested in systems and environmental and planetary systems. And so having got this figure here, who relates to birds, everything else in her movement and in her body so comes from an imaginary of water. And we then we delve into water as a specific world that has become an imaginary for many artists to think about. Afrofutures and their relationship to water and the seas. So I'm not sure how many contemporary arts exhibitions you see, but there was a really interesting one in London last year, which was called In the Black Fantastic. And you were able to see this work here by Wangechi Mutu, The End of Eating Everything. And I'm starting off with this one as well, because it introduces her work for the first time. She experimented with film, but she had a particular concern around consumption and particularly how our society considers this consumption and considers waste and environments that display waste. So she is, and also there's a sort of a nod to all those joining us online from Nairobi. She is of Kenyan heritage, but works. Yes, you're familiar with it, but she works a lot of the time in New York, and it's in North America. So just to also then declare myself as a curator, I work very much from here, from the UK, and so that is what I'm most familiar with: artists who work in different worlds, who come from African heritage and cultural heritage, and work in the global North. And this is my access I have to their thinking. So I think it's important to be mindful of that, of how we access artists' works and their thinking and their heritage, and what that means also in a globalized society, which we can discuss later as well. No, it's a Hayward Gallery actually. So if you saw that show, yeah, did you go and see it? No, yeah. We tried. Yeah. Yeah, it was a good exhibition. So it was in the Black Fantastic, and so this sort of explored a lot of themes that you're picking up on now. But because I think you study a lot of writers and literature and so on. So I'm today from the visual arts. So there's a lot going on in the visual arts as well that you want to consider as sort of spurring new imagery as well that comes with our relationship to the natural world. So Kojo Eshon, who is also based in this country, but also of Ghanaian heritage. You'll see a lot of his work in here. He's at Goldsmith. So there's a lot of people who straddle a lot of worlds, which is interesting to me. So he said about this particular piece that it's a cautionary parable for the overconsumption that is pushing our planet to catastrophe. The strange and haunting scenario that Mutu has conjured exhorts us to think more speculatively in picturing climate change. So I thought I used this as an opener just to embed this talk into thinking about the environment sort of at large and how artists respond to this.
I see these characters in a reality of their own that I've invented. I see them the end of time in a weird way. To look as she is, very beautiful and in some ways quite recognizable. And I told her about that as part of the beginning of the narrative. But I didn't go out of my way to make her look grotesque. I think there's a way that things look when you are consciously trying to make them look gross or or disgusting. My thing was that she was going to evolve into something that that was quite familiar, but at the same time was obscene, like obscene in the sense that it's like encountering a dirty lake or a dump, a big dump with garbage. It's like, is it grotesque or is it magnificent or is it just absolutely sad? I don't know what that. I was going for something that would change her from something that we could understand to something that made absolutely no sense. I'm not into these things. In actual fact, I'm kind of afraid of blood and, you know, and opening up of the body and all of these things that I end up doing in my work. I'm actually quite frightened of them. So maybe it's my way of really coming to terms with why this is all we have, flesh, body, and what is it that makes us unable to deal with it as a real thing? Just like we don't want to know what our food looks like before it gets to the table. We don't want to know that the lamb was slaughtered. That sort of thing, I really don't want to ignore. Those are the things I think we should look at, because that's where the truth is about our existence and why we behave the way we do.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Yeah, so I just let the artist talk a bit, because there's some really quite important topics, themes that sort of come out there for us. So there is the aspect of the grotesque that she's talking about. So it's, you know, how do we read in our environment that is polluted and in which we sort of witness waste, which is what she shows in this particular figure. She worked with the singer Santé Gold, and Santé Gold, she also looks very beautiful. There's the ambiguity of then something quite beautiful becoming something incredibly ugly, or she refers to the blood of, you know, this creature starts eating the birds. And so there's elements of ambiguity, confusion that have come together in the relationship to the natural world. And also when she, at the end, she talks about, but I'm this body, I am flesh, you know, how do you deal with that? How do we deal with also being very physical, very biological beings, and our intake of food and then the ways we produce. And so that's what she seeks to demonstrate in this film, The End of Eating Everything, of which we then saw a few snippets. So at the end, when you saw the smoke, so this creature floats along and it keeps on swallowing, eating more and more objects of consumption, and you can see this sort of smoke billowing out of her body, and at the end it explodes. So is this this is the parable that Coach Ashton was talking about earlier? Is this an image that we have in our relationship to our environment? But now, in order to having set up some of these questions and of the grotesque human nature or environment relationship, I would now like to sort of come into our aqua worlds that I sort of promised you. And so I've got a quote here by an American cultural thinker: the oceans proffer a sense of planet as a place where multiple species live as part of their material environs. So there is now a lot of thinking around multi-species thinking, so how humans relate to those, how can we take care and understand non-human species, in particular in a water environment to which humans have got very limited access, and how can we study it, how can we understand it? Here is another example by Mutu. So it's also quite typical of the hybrid creatures that get created through this very quest of how can we live in a water environment, what is the history that we relate also to being with the sea. And so here's just one example of Mutus, and I'm accompanying this again by a feminist woman thinker, because in these examples I give you, the feminist aspect comes out really strongly. It's a really important aspects of being against the patriarchy, finding a feminist voice, and also rethinking what the body of a woman is like, what could have been, and sort of then what I show in a minute, there are some imaginaries that are very historically informed. So in the words of Donna Haraway, the diverse earth-wide tentacular powers and forces and collected things with names like Maga, Gaia, Tangaroa, burst from waterfall Papa, Terra, Anyasu, Hima, Spider Woman, Pashamana, Oya, Gogo, Raven, archaeology, and many more. This is just sort of an indication of the many cultural relationships that there are in our human cultures, with finding mythological creatures that relate to the sea. And some of these artists, they use those mythical fiction in order to work it into their creations of humans, as well as humans on land and humans in the sea. So one important touchstone as well for a number of contemporary artists is the writing by a Caribbean poet, Derek Walcott, and I just put this in order just to now delve into an aspect from this sort of mythical, fictional, culturally informed towards understanding the sea having a history as well, and how can that be represented. So here this is an image from the Bible, which is taken, there's artists in this country as well here have taken up this image as well in order to understand the relationship you can see here between humans and non-human creatures. And Walcott as well, he makes references to a partly religious history of the sea. But this is kind of in the same par as other cultural histories, which what I alluded on the earlier slide. So Walcott says, where are your monuments, your battles, martyrs? Where is your tribal memory? Sirs, in that grey vault, the sea has locked them up. The sea is history, which has become sort of a really important trope to contemporary artists. The sea is history. And one way of framing that is also through the history of the transatlantic crossing, and that's sort of one part I will sort of explore a little bit more, because as part of an African diaspora, as part of seeking an identity, the interrogation of the meaning of transatlantic crossing or the Middle Passage has become really a key element of these bodies of works. So you might be, or you will probably be familiar with the works of Turner, whose works you can see in Tate Britain. His collection, part of his collection is there, but he actually there's quite a few at the V&A as well. So Turner, a 19th century artist whose work was primarily about human relationships to the sea. Now this is not so easy to read, this painting. So there's a lot going on here in terms of the relationship between humans and marine ocean life, and it relates to what is going on this ship. So this is a slave ship, and there has been a case on the slave ship called the Zong, which artists refer to, where the enslaved were on this ship in order to raise funds from the insurance company back in the UK. The slavers decided to throw a lot of humans overboard. And this is what you can see happening here. So humans being thrown overboard for mere capitalist enterprise of trickery and seeking funds to cover parts of this crossing. And this story has become a really important myth. I mean, it's factually informed, but it has become a myth of imagining what's happening here and how has this become an element of transformation. And this has been picked up by contemporary artists that I will Ellinger, but also then just to bracket this with Walcott's poem as a moment of transformation. So I'm just giving you another part of Walcott's poem, which is the end part. Exodus, bones soldered by coral to bone, mosaics mantled by the benediction, of the shark's shadow, which you saw on the earlier painting of the slide, and the soared chuckle of rocks with their new sea pools. There was a sound like a rumor without any echo of history really beginning. So I just wanted to bracket this, the thinking around what happened during the Middle Passage, how can artists now relate to it, and how they can shape their identities out of this knowledge. And so as one example, I want to show you the work by Ellen Gallagher. Ellen Gallagher is an artist who grew up in on the east coast of the United States. Her father is from Cape Verde. She now primarily works in Rotterdam, so in the Netherlands. And when she started out her career as an artist, she also worked as a marine biologist. So I thought that was a quite interesting segue, coming from marine biology to becoming an artist practitioner. But in order just to pick up on this story, which I just mentioned, through Turner's painting and Walcott's poem about the sea is history, that very fact of people dying on the crossing, and then specifically her work was about imagining pregnant women being thrown into the sea, which was also customary. She created these figures, which you can see here, out of these histories. So there's this imaginary around, so what if the women survived being thrown into the sea? What if they did give birth in the sea? What if there are underwater creatures now that can breathe underwater and proliferate and live there? So, and when you sort of maybe recall as well, the aspect of sound is also really important. Ellen Gallagher and a number of artists were also interested in the Detroit techno duo Drexciya, and Drexciya shapes the thinking around these figures here, which is called here in Draught of Fishes. But these are the Drexciyan beings that come out of that mythology. And they're quite beautifully done. This is a quite rare metal. It's a palladium that she uses, so they've got something really shiny, and they stand out a little bit from these paintings. They're quite large, and so here is within the exhibition as well. So this is sort of becomes part of an Afrofuturist narrative. In a sort of a world that's inspired by the mythic Black Atlantis, so those the Middle Passage or the transatlantic crossing, which are called Drexciya, but it's very positive as a sort of question of a survival and transformation in something that is livable, and imagining these underwater species. And then the way also these look, as you can see here, this particular head shape and the eye and so on, she was inspired, and I don't have an example of that, of sculptures from Central Africa. So you can see there are African cultures coming into the imaginary of an artist who essentially works in the global north. Another example. Sorry. That's not a very good slide, it's a bit blurred. But this is sort of the representation of the watery element. And so here I just wanted to show you quickly, just another thing. It's so striking, just the way also this form. These are pteropods, so they're water snails, which the artist Ellen Gallagher studied when she did her short practice as marine biologist in the Atlantic Ocean. And so she says, my project was studying pteropods, which these are wing-footed snails. I chose a subject because it appeared to me that they looked just like butterflies. I thought I would be catching beautiful butterflies in the water. It never occurred to me that they were microscopic. So I thought it was really nice, because you can see visual languages coming out together, but also an interesting aspect of scale here as well that she comments on. So, when we think about the imaginaries, when we scale things up, when we scale things down, when we sort of create new stories out of it, which I thought is something would be interesting to discuss. And And so just another example, the last one of her work, and again back to Stacey Limo, an aesthetic incitement to extend and connect with vulnerable creaturely life and with the inhuman and fathomable expanse of the seas. It is to expose oneself as a political act to shift towards a particularly feminist mode of ethical and political engagement. So this is how we sort of can look at this work and detail here, because it's quite complex, the worlds that she creates. You can see in these tentacles that I just showed you, which also then, by the way, if you remember the hair of the first creature we looked at, it's almost like tentacles as well. So you can see all of these faces embedded in here. And so I want to sort of emphasize of the positive, or that she and the positive aspect of transhistorical transformation. So through an emphasis on the biological and the cellular, and the study of the interdependence of life forms, sea mollusks, crustaceans, seaweed, tentacles of jellyfish, which she looks at, and then here is a quote by the historian Robin Kelly: "Bones of disembodied Africans, conscripts for the fields and factories, black bodies cannibalized by racial capitalism and its scientific jaws. Draxkia is not utopia." So you can see there's a bigger analysis at work here of a racial capitalist world that shaped enslavement, and that keeps on continuing to shape our environment, and how extraction, relationship to environments works. And science. We can come back to that. Yeah. So because obviously there's this is of the understanding of that science also underpins racial capitalism and the way it was put forward by European institutions. So yeah, and we can talk about that, what that means in terms of relationships of cultures to each other, and how environments are understood. That would be really interesting. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, more of her work here, and just sort of as a visual language here of working a canvas or a surface, of cutting things up, of fragmenting it, and then interdispersing it here, which looks like a sort of squid structures that come through these fragments that she's sort of created. So and finally, I wanted just to briefly show you a work by Donna Comfra. She maybe just briefly go back to this. See, Ellen Gallagher was also really interested in whales, so I guess that's why she worked in the North Atlantic, and so she has sort of created these sort of, which is difficult for you to see, but there are some sort of spreadsheet structures in there, and she refers to them as something as if you were these sort of scrims of decorations of whale bones. That's a habit of whalers were doing that. And so this is kind of my segue just to look into the seas at the example of the whale. So here's something a bit more specific of what is the human relation to a particular species, the whale, and how the whale has been hunted down, particularly in the sort of 19th century, late 19th century, again, that is of the exploitation of the marine environment to humans. And just to read this quote here: "The beauty of maritime nature becomes terrible under the sign of Western modernity and our capitalist present, even with the latter's horror dramatized in scenes of the industrial destruction of whales and the collapse of the Arctic ecosystem is grotesquely aestheticized." And I just want to show you some brief extract. So we're going to have some video again. yeah, there we go. Yeah, thank you. So yes, I've just got some still images from this triptych, Vertigo Sea, which actually, if you saw the exhibition here in London, Entangled Past, which was shown as part of that exhibition, Vertigo Sea is it's creates a really quite immersive environment, and it's quite mesmerizing. It's quite difficult just to take your eyes off it, and these 3 screens that and the work runs for almost an hour, and it interweaves what you just saw, some of the whaling itself, so the technology, the relationship to the whale through hunting it. And then as you just saw at the very end, the glimpses of, but there are also ecosystems. So understanding that the oceans, the sea is part of a planetary systems. And the artist uses archival footage. There's footage from the BBC Natural History films, and then some images. If you couldn't recall, there was a gentleman in sort of 18th century attire standing on the shore. So some footage that they've shot themselves. So just to say again, this is embedded in a historical language, be it archive or be it restage, as if we were in the 18th century, in order to again emphasize the sea is history, the environment has a history, and that's sort of what is attempt to make visible through their works by collaging or montaging various materials together. And then to a confra, and to actually to most of the artists, it's really important of where we are today. What is the present time? And there are multiple migration that the artist integrated in this film as well. So there are some Vietnam in the 1970s, and here the most sort of recent media images we have from people crossing from the African continent across the Mediterranean to Europe. So to indicate there's a continuation of the issues that have started a long time ago. And that's the end of my talk.